welcome to CAD and Lunch and Learn. Thank you for joining us for this 30-minute session today. We obviously have two speakers today, Sarah and Dan. Just a little housekeeping. We'll all be muted to avoid any background noise, and I would encourage all of you to put your questions into the chat so we can run through them later. So, this month, we published a trend report called Future of Food. It was taking a view of the food and drink trends that are driving new concepts. We'll look at emerging trends and best-in-class examples and how they apply to today's retail and hospitality landscape. So without further ado, let me hand over to Sarah and Dan.
Thanks, Meha, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I think it's worth mentioning that the trends we're going to be looking at are what we expect to play out over the next 5 to 10 years. So we're not necessarily talking about things that we're going to expect to see next year or in 18 months. It's really looking at how the next 5 to 10 years are going to play out. And in terms of our focus generation, in terms of generations, we're really looking at generation Gen Z and millennials. And the reason for that is they currently account for 25% of total retail spend. Their spending has recovered faster post-COVID. They seem to be more willing to go out to spend in shops, retail and hospitality. It's going to continue to increase in line with their earning power. So we're going to get to about 39% by 2030. And this is even more true when it comes to luxury. There's a report by Bain that talks about the spend of these two generations going up 45% by, I think it's 2025. So if you've got a luxury element to your brand, then they're even more important and significant.
Yeah, and we think what's really interesting about that is one, that's higher than the overall kind of retail contribution that those generations will be making by 2030 even. So luxury is a much quicker adoption, if you like, by these younger generations with this disposable income. But when we were talking to Harrods about this a couple of weeks ago, one of the things that we shared with them, and they kind of confirmed with us, was that this coming from two ends, if you like. So there are high net worth individuals or high net worth families, and the money is moving down to the younger generations sooner. But also at the other end, you've got people in their 20s who maybe at the moment in the West don't feel like they've ever got the chance to buy a house or get on the property ladder, and may well still be living at home. And so view the money that they earn and the money that they might otherwise be saving towards a longer term purchase or property as being more disposable. And so actually some of that income is going into luxury goods that allow them to express themselves, their success, or whatever else they might want to be doing. So we think that there are some new habits that we're seeing and some interesting shifts in purchasing. But anyway, we've only got a short amount of time. And so we're just really going to try and touch on each of the 5 themes and give you a flavour of what they're about. And we're happy to talk more about this separately later anyway. So, Sarah, shall we start?
Absolutely, with no further ado. So there are 5 themes that we've identified. First one we're going to look at is called Planet First. So, pretty much what it says on the tin, environment is at the forefront of everyone's minds, and no more so than brands. Customers really expect brands to take a position of leadership and really to help them to stick to their values and stick to their goals. Really interesting example of closed loop dining. Some of you might know the restaurant Silo, which is in Hackney in East London. But that restaurant's been built with the bin in mind, but also with a view to eliminating the need for a bin. So all of they've signed up with producers who are able to deliver to them in reusable containers only. So they've eliminated that element of packaging waste. And anything that can be reused and repurposed, I think is it potato skins, made into crisp. So before you even get to the composting element, you're looking at what can you do with food waste to repurpose it into a new and delicious thing to eat that can go onto the menu. Any scraps of food that are left over are composted. I think it's the crushed wine bottles are used to make the crockery. Furniture is upcycled before it's recycled. And the really interesting thing about it is this isn't a pop-up or an experiment or an interesting initiative to see what's possible. This is a going concern. This is a commercial enterprise. They're charging something like £65 per person for dinner, so it's not wildly expensive. It's a sort of affordable luxury and affordable treat. And what they say is, we want to show what's possible. We want to show what's commercially feasible.
And what is interesting about this is that actually, it's something that anyone could adopt. Any hospitality operator could adopt. Obviously, there's a huge amount of challenges, and it will take a long time to move a supply chain and move a menu and move your customers' understanding of what to expect. But it's actually some of the other things we're going to talk about later on are definitely more in the future. This is something that could happen, but it will take a lot of work to deliver right now. But it's an important trend, and we see that move happening over the next 5 years for sure. Not that everyone will be zero waste, and not that everyone will be using potato peelings in their recipes, but that there are a lot of other elements to this trend that will also be able to be adopted. We talked about food miles, for example, which I'm not going to go into now, but in fact that the collaboration of multiple brands and creating communities is also very important as well. And that leads us nicely onto our second trend, which is about being embedded in a community.
Exactly. So again, it's that sense that pop-ups are all very well, but what about the legacy element of things? You guys might be aware, some of you, of Sean Sherman, who is a chef working in Minneapolis in the States. He won the James Beard Culinary Award last year, and he runs what is essentially an indigenous ingredients kitchen. So he doesn't use anything in his cooking that was imported to the United States by Europeans. So it completely changes the sort of the tone of the food, because you're not starting with those typical things that we all have in our kitchens, like olive oil and lemons and black pepper. So it changes the sort of it changes the taste profile, the flavour. Absolutely. It changes the starting points. And on the back of the success of his restaurant, he's now opening more of a kind of food hall retail space. So it's going to have products to take home. So giving people the chance to take home these indigenous ingredients they might not have been familiar with, that are growing all around them, but they've become so accustomed to sort of standard ways of cooking. So and he's going to have I think a tea bar there, food to go. Really interesting example of someone who's doing something really pioneering, but in an accessible way.
Yeah, and we can see that is about thinking differently about recipes. Again, building on the idea of food miles, building on the idea of seasonal eating and the idea of eating what is around you and what is culturally relevant to the location where you are. Now, of course, this is much more complicated than a generic homogeneous menu, but everything over the next 10 years is going to get a lot more complicated anyway. Everybody's jobs are going to get harder. We're all going to have to work harder to maintain and create customer loyalty. And so this kind of community spirit is really important, and understanding who your community are in the areas where you're trading or serving people. It's interesting to see what IKEA and Google are doing at the other end, of large corporates who are embracing, creating spaces that work not just for their function, but IKEA are moving away from purely retail-based spaces, just as Google are opening offices which will have public spaces in them as well, places where people can meet, places where people can join groups, where they can do things, where they gather, which are designed to be open. So the corporate office does not have a hard stop barrier out which you can't get in. And I think there's a lot of thought around how that can change and how brands can meaningfully integrate in communities. So it's not just about saying welcome to your brand West Hampstead and just having a generic space. It's really about thinking about who is in that community around you. And we're doing some interesting work on this at the moment with a client in Singapore about how they can really create offers that connect with that very local community within a kind of 5-minute radius.
And actually, there's a really nice example of someone who's doing that, right now in London. If you know Yard Sale Pizza, which has about 10 shops in East and South London, they have struck up deals with pubs, about 70 pubs, I think it's more than 70 actually, in the vicinity of each of their pizza shops. And what the pubs, for one reason or another, aren't running a kitchen offer, but the customers of the pubs, the drinkers, do want to be able to eat when they get there. So the deal is you can be fed by Yard Sale, you can order your pizza to the pub. It works for the pub because obviously the drinkers stay for longer and spend more. It works for Yard Sale because they can deliver locally when they have their own drivers, so that's feasible for them. And obviously it works for the customers who are ordering, because they get to enjoy a local brand that they already know they like and value in the pub, which is where they want to be. So it's just a really neat example of something that works for everyone and is very much embedded in the locality of an area.
Absolutely. The third trend, moving on, is modern hedonism. Now, when we present this in a more expanded way, we talk about how at first hedonism can seem like a bit of a counterpoint to the Planet First trend that we started with, which is all very much about really looking after what we've got. But we're all humans, and there are inherent contradictions in all of us. And someone who is really focused on looking after themselves and looking after the planet and the environment on Monday to Wednesday and Thursday might still want to have some sort of blowout on Friday and Saturday. And so, it's not. No one's going to start living like monks. And so we need to recognise that there is still a need for excitement, for stimulation, and for innovation around that. One of the things we talk about is multi-sensory spaces, and we touch on the idea of ASMR. There was an exhibition, or is still an exhibition, in the Design Museum in London until around April, which is all around ASMR, which is an online trend for oral stimulation, in the sense that when you listen to sounds very closely and it's a single sound, that you can, it heightens the senses, it makes people feel very comforted, very calm, or in some cases the opposite. Some sounds elicit a really negative response, that it's disliked. But this exhibition has taken that idea, has created physical areas and spaces and installations that you can interact with, but is also allowing people to record those interactions and then post them on their own social channels. And that while is also interesting for the fact that social and video content is now such an important part of ways that brands need to use to engage with their customers and with the people who connect with them. But there's also an important kind of wellness layer into this hedonism as well, isn't there?
Yeah, really interesting, the wellness, and it's where the wellness kind of dovetails with. Wellness has sort of become an intersection between food and beauty. And we're really seeing products coming to market that are or being developed that really kind of cover both bases. And it's where larger brands can sort of bring that together for customers. So some examples are the cereal brand, which is called Surreal. And it really, if you look at the branding, the packaging, and the type of product it is, it very much harks back to those childhood cereals, which feel like they're not very good for you, but it reminds you of, it's got that nostalgic quality. But in fact, they are as healthy as you like. They have got a lot of protein in them. They have got nothing added that you wouldn't want and everything that you would, but presented beautifully. They are obviously more expensive than a standard cereal, but what you're getting is a very high quality nutritional product that does other things and harks back to your childhood. It's probably as healthy as a bowl of porridge, but without any sort of worthy overtones. Some other examples is Sauce, which has these little chocolate-covered collagen balls. I can't say that any of us have tried them, but it's a really interesting blend of food, of a treat, of something that's sweet, that is also, good for you in an aesthetic sense. I know Little Saints, which is the cocktails, pre-mixed, very much about grown-up adult flavor profiles. That are, this is going beyond, trying to do something that tastes of juniper to remind people of gin. It's exploring other avenues and other ideas. So there's those kind of products. There's also things like Trip, the CBD drinks, which are doing very well. We've seen a beautiful product that's in prototype called Kea, and it is psychedelics. It's an exploratory product. It's still only in prototype phase, but it's exploring how psychedelics could be sold, and of course the packaging is all sustainable as well. Some other examples: Sentia, which is the drink that's been developed by David Knott.
Yes, exactly.
Scientist, and that is supposed to replicate the feeling of having had a couple of alcoholic drinks, so that sense of sociability and openness that people typically tend to report after they've had one or two drinks. The idea is that Sentia will replicate that. It's got no alcohol in it, so you get none of the consequences of drinking that you might not want or might not be able to tolerate.
No, it stimulates certain sensory parts of the brain, which I'm not clever enough to explain or even really properly understand. But the idea is, as Sarah said, that it gives you that buzz that makes you, at the start of the evening when you're having a wonderful time making new friends and feeling really fluent and really
Okay,
good looking.
yeah.
You know, all of that without going further into the being drunk and falling over, and certainly avoiding the hangover the next day part. And what's interesting about all of these products as well, as Sarah touched on, and also from the Sean Sherman example earlier, is that we're seeing new and distinct flavor profiles coming up. You know, these products aren't trying to taste like anything that's gone before, and they're using different flavor blends, and they're all very adult. They're not, none of these things are sweet or sugary or particularly floral or fruity. They're much more kind of serious and herbal and grown up.
Yeah, and it also goes without saying that in terms of sustainability from a packaging point of view, every element will have been very, very carefully thought about and picked over. So there's not going to be any, it's very much in tune with what the customer profile would expect.
Yeah. Moving on, the fourth trend is mixed reality. And the first piece I want to pick up here is something that I think we're almost seeing happen, you know, beginning to happen now. From talking about the ASMR exhibition and the fact that what was online became a physical exhibition, but allowed that content creation to happen and then be reshared online again. So that, trying to blend the physical and the digital experience. We're also seeing broadcast channels being incredibly important for brands. There's a statistic that is very current, I think, from January of this year, which is of something like 38%
of users of TikTok will visit a restaurant or order from it because of content they've seen on TikTok. So nearly 40%.
So something like 50 million people have responded directly to a brand or a restaurant, showing their menu, showing their food with either an order or a visit. Which is hugely compelling to say how important in social channels that outreach is, that projection is of a brand. And where we would have, when we were talking about spaces, maybe even 5 years ago, the idea of an Instagram wall, a single place in a space that would be designed to be well lit and be a focus of attention that people would want to take a selfie next to. What we're now seeing is that spaces as a whole, brand experiences as a whole, need to be set up to be places that clients, customers, can create their content. Now, that can either just be the space is enabled and you're allowing people to film and photograph. There's no point trying to stop them. This is part of culture. This is part of how people now communicate. Or it can be actually creating dedicated studio spaces to encourage either those customers or other content creators or influencers or brands or other chefs to come in, use your space, share and collaborate in a community-minded way again. And then that content is not your corporate channel, although it can sit there along with other things, but it is allowed to go out into the world through those users' channels also.
And I think the last trend, we've probably got 30 seconds before Meher wants us to wrap up the questions to look at quickly, is fluid, which is all about flexible spaces. We've all seen AI, the rise of AI, the effect of that is going to be ongoing. We've seen places like the Outernet in London, which is all about exploring what a place can be for and how you can change the sort of feel and tone of the space because of the through digital features. Supersede in China, it's a little bit difficult to explain without images, but it uses modular sort of furniture that comes down from the ceiling on strings, and you can arrange the space as to how you need it, whether it's for a drinks event or whether you need desks or tables or spaces. And it's really built about building things with that modularity and flexibility in mind, and that can be as simple as furniture fixtures on wheels, things that can be moved rather than fixed to the floor.
And actually on that, we've some of us have just come back from Euroshop in Dusseldorf, which is every 3 years enormous retail exhibition, which I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with. And we've seen a lot of fixturing that is designed now to be flexible, that is designed not to be fixed into the floor. We've seen a system where this is getting a bit boring and well, maybe not boring, getting a little bit technical, but is interesting. Where for example, we're looking at a supermarket environment where chillers and freezers, all of the services are fed to them from the ceiling rather than being hard plumbed into the floor, and that means that you can move them anywhere. And again, they are on wheels or they are movable in different ways. We saw robots there that were one was working in a bakery that was traying cakes, putting individual cakes on a tray into the oven, taking the tray out, putting them onto a cooling rack, and this is kind of fluid, but also kind of about mixed reality as well, is that we've had a lot of, robots have been talked about within retail and within hospitality spaces for at least 10 years, but have always seemed to be a gimmick. But we've seen so much development over the last 5 years in terms of back of house robots. If you think of what's happening with brands like Amazon and Ocado for their replenishment and their distribution centers, that technology is now super mature and is much quicker at doing certain jobs and much more dependable and reliable and precise at doing certain jobs than humans are. And where we see that maturity coming into retail and hospitality spaces is that it allows you to deploy your people at the points where they make the biggest difference to the customer experience. Everybody is struggling with recruitment and retention. And so it feels as though in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see robots beginning to make a meaningful impact within retail and hospitality. And we're not even talking about AI because it's too big and too complex and too fast moving a subject at the moment for us to understand. But there is a huge amount of money going into AI development and investment. So I think we've kind of done it quite quickly.
Yeah.
As I said at the start, we've got a full presentation which is about 30 or 40 pages, which takes about 35 minutes to go through, and we'd be happy to fix up a time to come and visit anyone else who's interested in seeing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, both of you. I'm really impressed that you got through the whole thing in that time.
When we touched on, the examples that don't rely too much on visual stimulus as well, because you need the photography there. So.
Exactly. So while people add their questions, please add them to the chat. I will happily go through them. I have a question. We talk about robots and AI and all these new developments. How much do you think it's these businesses who are obviously these are not mainstream things that we are discussing here. These are things that are emerging. Do you think there are other parts of that business that will play down on because the investment is put into this primary thing of, I don't know, for example, the robot cafe, or I don't know, the internet thing. Would there be parts of these new emerging trends where cost is not used in places where we think that it would?
Interesting point to make on cost before maybe there's a bigger point that Sarah might make is that one of the other things we also saw at Euroshop is that there are businesses that are now set up to do things like lease you a robot or lease you large format screens. So the outlet, if anyone doesn't know what the Outernet is in London, it's currently a physical open space right near the redeveloped Tottenham Court Road tube station and Elizabeth Line station, which is 3 sides and a ceiling, which are just enormous LED screens. So effectively 3 walls and the ceiling are all screens, very large format, huge, probably millions of pounds worth of technology. But you can now lease that. So you can do that for a year and without having to purchase all of that equipment belongs to someone else and create an experience, or you can lease it for 3 months, or you can lease it simply because it means you don't have to make that capital investment. And we're going to see the same things with robotics as well. So it's not necessarily that this stuff is too expensive or difficult to think about from a budgeting point of view. There will be different ways of paying for it. Sorry, Sam, I think you had a really interesting point.
I think the question you're asking is, where does the investment go? I think you have to start with what is the problem you're trying to solve, and does the technology help solve that problem or not? So to Dan's earlier point about robots, if a robot can be designed that can pour your precision coffee exactly how you like it, you order it through your phone, it's ready at exactly the point that you want it, then that is arguably a huge benefit because you're not having to explain your particular taste or what you like to a different person every day. That is a really useful thing to be able to do.
Right. But the attraction to these places, for lack of a better word, is it's a gimmick thing. Robot
is definitely not.
That's what I'm saying. If it fulfills a really useful need and helps the creative to not have to worry about staffing, for example, then it most definitely isn't a gimmick.
No, of course not. In the way that a gimmick is known, it's not like that. Do we have any other questions? I'll give everyone a minute. All right, well, there doesn't seem to be any other questions.
With our information overload.
There's a lot of information to take in on this. This will be up on YouTube. We'll also have it up as a podcast. Please, everyone, feel free to just email in if you want to arrange a time for Sarah and Dan to actually elaborate on all of these topics. We'll be happy to arrange 30 minutes with you, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, either via Zoom or in person. In person is always fun because we can do that now. Any other last remarks, Dan?
No, I think we're all good. Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining.
Thank you so much for joining. If you want to email us at enquiries@cada.co.uk. You can find our webinars on YouTube and our podcasts on Podbean, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music.
Great.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.